I am in a sloppy situation with my parents and seek advice on the same. I explain what happened with some context first to keep things clear. So I, 26F, am the younger one in a family of 4, consisting of my mother, my father, and my older sister Megan, 35F. I come from a wealthy family. Both my parents have been handling a well-established family business, so finances have never been an issue. My birth has been an accident, which is why there is such a huge age gap between me and Megan, and my parents sure have treated me like one for most of the time. Since my parents were already doing well with business, they expected their children to be just like them, work-focused and high-achieving. Megan has always been their special child, the one who excelled in everything she put her hands to, whereas I have been the average Joe, who is good at most things but not as good as Megan. Due to the age gap between us, I haven't been a part of most of Megan's life and she didn't put the effort to be there for me either. There wasn't anything wrong between us, just that the distance was never bridged from either end. Anyway, I had grown used to the ignorance and favoritism towards Megan from my family, so I stayed aloof. My parents didn't care about how I was as long as they weren't going to hear about it from someone else, so I made sure I stayed out of trouble at the cost of my freedom. When I was in elementary school, Megan had passed high school and went to a very prestigious college. With her gone, all my parents' focus shifted towards me, like I was their new project, but because I had grown in a habit of staying distant, their attempts to connect with me soon turned into them pestering me into spending time with them. I was extremely frustrated by all this, but because I didn't have an option, I decided to let it go and spend some obligatory time with them every day. They tried their best to have a good relationship with me, but I over the years had realized what a bunch of narcissists they were and had decided to move out as soon as I could. During this time, Megan had graduated and was working at a tech company. She met her then boyfriend, let's call him Mark, at the company, and Mark was her boss. When my parents got wind of Megan's relationship, they were more than pleased, thinking Mark must be from a rich background as well to get such a high post. But on meeting him, they realized he wasn't as rich as them. To clear things out, he came from a wealthy background as well, but not as wealthy as our family. This somehow tarnished their reputation and they started asking Megan to leave him. When she didn't agree, they changed the tactic and instead went and talked to Mark about how brave it was of him to accept having no kids in the future for Megan. So, Megan had been set on being child-free since she started dating, and my parents were on point about Mark knowing nothing of it. Mark was shocked by this revelation and as expected, he broke up with Megan soon after. Mark was the one Megan wanted to marry and was going to tell him about not wanting children soon after the families met, but this betrayal from her own parents didn't sit right with her, so she decided to stay away from home as much as possible. I wasn't a part of this drama but felt extremely bad for her, and tried to contact her via email because I didn't have her number, but after getting no responses a few times, I stopped as well. My parents were sure angry with Megan for abandoning them like this, but didn't let the news go outside our immediate family. I was by this time also about to pass high school and had decided to follow Megan's footsteps, of leaving as soon as I got the chance. I had worked pretty hard and hence also got a scholarship to my preferred college which was a 2-hour ride from my hometown, so I was financially independent as soon as I was done with school. My parents did try to convince me to take money from them for my education, which I am sure was an attempt to hold it over my head later, but I politely declined and went on with life. Over the next few years, my parents were more involved with me than with Megan. I assumed something must have gone down between them. I didn't entertain them much, but they didn't get the hint and actually showed up at my college on 2 separate occasions, but stopped after I sternly asked them to not, and in exchange, I offered to show up at their pretentious social events once in a while. As I mentioned before, my parents had kept their fallout with Megan a family secret, but this time around at their party, I realized that they had started to badmouth her in front of their friends and family. Because I knew the whole story and how Megan wasn't in the wrong, I found their behavior extremely toxic. I could have confronted them about it, but knowing how irrationally they would have reacted, I decided to remove myself from the situation and stay as far as I could from my parents for good, as soon as I got a job after graduation, which was a few months away. During my final year, I met Joe. Joe was in my batch and we had noticed each other a few times but got close during a group presentation. He was the nicest and smartest guy I had known, so I approached him, and we soon got into a relationship. On getting to know him more, I got to know that he was abandoned by his parents and had lived in foster homes all his life. He worked extremely hard by doing part-time jobs during school and was able to afford to go to college just because his grandma left him college money in her will. He was extremely bright and had been placed with one of the top packages during our final year placements. I had also gotten a job in the same place as him, so we both decided to live together. The city we were moving to was way far from my hometown, so it was a win-win situation for me. Megan was also living in the same city, so the chances of me bumping into her were extremely high, but because she had kept her distance from me all this while, I decided to not inform her about my move. I told my parents about the job at my graduation ceremony and introduced Joe as a friend because I knew how investigative they would become if they knew he was my boyfriend. My parents weren't happy about me shifting to such a faraway place, but the way I spoke made it clear that I wasn't really affected by what they thought of it, which they realized. They honestly wouldn't have cared less if Megan was still in our life, but with her gone, their accidental child, was their only hope, and so they complied without much discussion. The next few years were good, with Joe being an absolute delight, and I knew he was the man I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. I did talk to my parents on the phone occasionally, and they had started pestering me to find a guy to get married to because otherwise, they wished to set me up with one of our family friend's son. I still hadn't told them about Joe and me, because I very clearly remembered what had gone down with Megan and Mark, and didn't want the same fate for myself. Joe proposed to me soon after. We were both 25, and I obviously accepted. He knew every nitty-gritty of my dynamic with my family, so I was surprised when he wanted me to tell my parents about our engagement. I told him it was best if we eloped and had a reception for his friends and family, as I was fine with not having my side of the family involved. Being the kind man he is, Joe suggested that we tell my parents about it, giving them the benefit of the doubt that because they had been good to me during the past years, they might have moved on from their class-related prejudices and would accept our relationship. I knew very well how this would go down, but for Joe's sake, I decided to give it a shot. We had plans to visit my hometown a month after my engagement, and unexpectedly a week prior to that, both Joe and I ran into Megan, which hadn't happened once in the 3 years I had lived there. We were surprised to see each other and honestly didn't know how to react, but Joe broke the awkwardness by introducing himself to Megan. Once she was able to take everything in, she immediately hugged me and asked us if we wanted to go out for lunch with her. We were running errands and so we said yes. The conversation we had was full of surprises, but I'll talk about this later. We exchanged numbers and decided to stay in touch. So anyway, Joe and I went to meet my parents. They were extremely surprised to see my friend Joe accompany me, but once they saw the engagement ring on my hand, things were pretty clear. Their reaction was more of a surprise than of shock, so irrespective of all odds, I got a little optimistic about them actually accepting Joe. My dad took the initiative and started talking to Joe asking about his life and future plans, to which he replied very politely. Dad looked impressed until the topic of his childhood came up. As soon as he began telling them about his traumatic days before his teenage, both my parents' expressions changed from excited to disappointed. My mom even gave me a look while he was talking, and I think he noticed because after that, Joe got extremely quiet for the rest of the day. When we both were about to sleep, I asked him if he was okay, and he brushed it off saying it was fine. We left the next day with my parents asking me to call them as soon as I got back. I knew Joe was hurt by my parents' reaction, and as much as I wanted to say I told you so, I acted empathetically and told him that no matter what happened, he was going to be the one I wanted to marry, and that it didn't matter what my parents thought of our relationship. This statement did change his mood a little bit, and we reached our city. I decided to call my parents like they had asked me to, and to be honest, one of the main reasons I wanted to talk to them was to give them a peace of mind because no one could disrespect my fiancée like that. I called them and their expected "how could you be with someone from a lower class category" rant began. They kept telling me how I wouldn't be able to adjust with him because I had been raised with all these riches, completely forgetting about how I had been living with him for so long, and that they could find a better match for me. I stayed quiet during all this, and once they were done, I told them just one thing, that they weren't the bosses of me and no one could stop me from marrying Joe. Infuriated, they cut the call. What happened next is why I am sharing this incident in the first place. After their call with me, my parents decided to get in touch with Megan, after almost 5 years. I got to know about this from Megan herself. They knew about where she worked, got her email from the company website, and wrote an email from Dad's side saying it was extremely urgent and that she should contact them ASAP. Megan, thinking that someone must have been in a serious condition medically, decided to call Dad, who asked her to come home as soon as she could. She told him that she wanted to know it right then on the phone, but Dad wasn't clear and said that he would tell her everything once she came home. Sensing the stress in our father's voice, she took the next flight home. When she reached, she was welcomed with a hug from my mother, who was crying hysterically. Dad escorted her to the living room and asked her to sit down. Thinking that someone had passed, she insisted strongly on knowing what was going on. That's when my parents broke the news to her, that I had decided to cut contact with them over my poor boyfriend. They didn't know that Joe and Megan had already met, and went on talking about how ill-mannered he was, that I misunderstood and completely negated their advice to leave him when their intention was to keep me safe. Megan was shocked at how low they could stoop just to control our lives and called them out immediately. Confused about why Megan wasn't siding with them, they asked her what was wrong, and she told them everything about how she knew it was them who broke her and Mark. For context, The day Megan and I met, I got to know that she hadn't been in a relationship since her breakup with Mark. I sympathized and told her that it wasn't right of mom and dad to bring up her wanting to be childless in front of Mark. She told me that she had no idea that mom and dad had initiated the conversation, and had thought that Mark brought up something about children and our parents answered honestly. Megan was extremely angry but had moved on in life to raise this issue, but now when our parents were trying to do the same thing with me, she decided to show them what was up. When Megan started talking, my parents got quiet pretty quickly because they knew their crocodile tears weren't going to work anymore. She went on for an hour or so, talking about every little thing our parents had done to control our childhood. Her catharsis was obviously not well received by our parents, who tried to calm her down by claiming that they were protecting us. Megan was done with them and told them that she didn't want to be in any contact with them from now on and that any attempts of contact from their side could lead to a harassment case from her side. My parents tried their best to convince her to not cut contact with them, but it was a little too late. Megan called me when she reached back home and told me everything that went down. She also advised me to stay vigilant as mom and dad were going to come after me now. I thanked her and will be meeting her this weekend. She was absolutely right, because I got a call from mom soon after, asking for forgiveness and helping them fix things with Megan. I told them that I wasn't going to clean their mess and it was because of their constant manipulative tactics that Megan had decided to cut them off finally, and for good. Mom got extremely angry and accidentally blamed me for causing the chaos, saying that I had proven by this that I was indeed an accident. It triggered a lot of childhood trauma and I immediately cut the call and blocked her. She must have realized how vile that attack was as I got a few missed calls and texts from dad, asking for forgiveness for whatever had gone down, and asking for a meetup to sort things out in person. I am honestly over their fake facade to have a family and save face in front of their posh community. I didn't respond to him and was in a pretty bad mood the whole day, and the thing mom mentioned about it being my fault has stuck with me. Am I the a-hole for telling Megan about my parents' involvement in breaking her relationship which led to her officially having no contact with them? Update 1. Hi, thanks to everyone for such an overwhelming response to the original post. I didn't expect it to reach these many people, and I truly am grateful for all the advice given. I am writing this update after 2 days. So, as I mentioned previously, I was pretty bummed out after the call with my mom. Joe noticed this and took me out for dinner later. He made me understand that there was no point holding on to what my mom said because over the years she has proved how flaky she is. He also apologized to me for not listening to what I said in the first place and insisting on visiting my parents. I told him it was okay, thanked him for taking time off to deal with my situation, and that he would be my priority no matter what. The next day I met Megan and had a long chat with her. We bonded over how our parents had treated us like objects for the show since the beginning. She told me what mom and dad had said about Joe, and as angry as I was, I let it go because conversing with them over this just wasn't worth it. I asked her if she went no contact with them because of what I had told, and she said that she had been thinking about it for a long time, not like they had been in touch in the last few years. The last straw for her was that they called her for their petty "we will lose our reputation" and did not even consider the possibility that she was busy with her own life. She realized at that moment that they didn't care about me or her, as long as they had someone to hang around at their convenience. I agreed to everything she was saying, and it kind of made it up in the back of my mind that I would also be cutting contact with my parents for good. Megan and I hit off so well that we decided to make these conversations a regular thing. Because I live in a different city, thankfully I have been away from the gossip that must have gone around after Megan's feuds with our parents. I haven't received any calls or texts from them so far. It looks like they have decided to not contact me for good, and I sincerely hope it stays that way. Update 2. A lot has gone down since the last update. I'll explain in detail. I am writing this update a month after the last one. So, after talking to Megan, I talked to Joe about our wedding and realized that I wanted a wedding as long as I didn't have to deal with my family's drama, so we decided that I would not invite my parents. Not inviting them to the wedding would also be my way of making it clear that I wanted no contact with them. I hadn't gotten any calls so far from them, so it all made complete sense. We made our wedding announcement via Facebook as a save the date for close friends and family. My parents were blocked. Megan was actually the first one to get an invite, and she accepted to be a part of the wedding as a bridesmaid. The preparations were going fine until one day I got a spam mail from Dad's company email. It started with something about the company and soon transitioned into him apologizing profusely because he got to know about my wedding from one of my friend's parents. He mentioned how he thought about my relationship with Joe and how they were too hard on him. He begged for a second chance to get things straight. I obviously denied it in a reply and told him clearly that it was too little, too late, and blocked the email. The week next to the announcement, Megan and I were out shopping and discussing my plans for the wedding, When I got a call from my maternal grandma. Granny and I have been extremely close during our childhood, and she was also invited to the wedding. When I picked up the call, she began by screaming at me for pushing my parents aside from such an important event in my life. I hadn't expected such a bizarre reaction from her and actually froze while she kept calling me evil for doing this. Megan noticed how shocked I looked and took the phone from my hands. She heard every vile thing Grandma was saying and decided to give her a piece of her mind. She told Grandma that she should just not come to the wedding if that's how she thinks of me. Grandma realized it was Megan and got quiet, knowing that there was no escape for her. Megan asked her to not interfere now when she couldn't take a stand for us when our parents treated us like objects, and that it was disgraceful coming from her. Grandma told Megan that Mom had called her and told her how I shunned them off because my fiancé didn't like them, which was why she was yelling at me. Megan wasn't the one who took excuses for an answer and told Grandma that she was old enough to not fall for Mom's tactics and that she would attend the wedding now only when she apologized to me and cut the call. I almost immediately got a call back from her and she begged me to not be kicked from the wedding, to which I agreed after she apologized. This incident made me realize that although Megan and I weren't close during our childhood, she still was my elder sister who would be there for me. I made up my mind right then and asked Megan if she would walk me down the aisle. She got emotional and we both shed a few tears, after which she agreed. I went back home and told Joe about everything that went down, and he was happier than me to have Megan playing such a crucial part in my wedding. Things have been quiet so far, but knowing my parents, I just hope that the wedding takes place successfully without any added tantrums. Update 3. Hi. Since a lot of you asked about what the situation was, I am writing this update after 3 months and this will be the last one. Starting with the good news, Joe and I got married the last week. The wedding was a mixed bag of events. I'll elaborate. So as expected, my parents did pull a final stunt, in a post explaining their side of the story, which no one asked for. After they posted their side, blaming me and Megan being a thankless child who was abandoning their parents in old age, and also commented on our character, things mentioned in the post were pretty vile. The people who didn't know about our feud also got to know about it through this post. A lot of relatives whom I had invited to the wedding took my parents' side and sent me messages asking me to make amends. In reply to them, I made a post stating very clearly that anyone who wants to take my parents' side shall be disinvited from the wedding, and let's just say that the invitees list got short for my side. When Joe read the post, he got extremely angry at how far my parents had gone and suggested filing a case of defamation against them. I didn't want to get into anything with them this close to the wedding. I got a call from Megan, crying about how bad things had been for her after the post because her socials and emails were flooded with texts calling her names. All I could do at the moment was console her, but I had made up my mind to take some action after the wedding. Our wedding was a destination wedding, solely for the reason that my parents couldn't show up at the venue and create a mess. They did try to contact Joe this time, but he just ignored them, and we went ahead with our wedding, which was as beautiful as I imagined it to be. Only the people I actually wanted there were present when Megan gave me away to Joe. Another good thing that happened was that Megan and one of the groomsmen found each other good company, and she told me she saw them getting together. I got to know from Joe soon after that the guy and Megan had decided to date, which we all were extremely happy about. Once Joe and I came back from our honeymoon, I decided to call Megan and ask her if she wanted to send a joint notice to our parents about the defamation case, and she immediately agreed to it. The post had now been deleted, but fortunately, Joe had taken a screenshot of it, and our lawyer was satisfied enough with that as evidence. My parents literally went hysterical when our lawyer called them and informed them about the petition. I got a lot of calls from my grandma, but I decided to ignore them, knowing what they were about. The next day was the first time in months that I saw my parents. They looked exhausted, but I didn't care because it was them who caused the drama. They mentioned how they had deleted the post realizing what they had done was wrong, but our lawyer mentioned to them the damages caused to Megan and my reputation and made it clear that it would cost them a lot of money and time for the damages. My dad's face changed colors immediately after hearing this and begged to settle it out of court. Megan was adamant about making them suffer, whereas I just wanted to get over with them as soon as I could. On talking, Joe and I convinced Megan to not sue them in return for a public apology and a written contract signed by them stating that they wouldn't be contacting me or Megan again, or they would have to pay for it legally. They asked for some time to think about it and the very next day responded positively to the offer. There was a full-fledged apology on both their personal and business accounts. They also signed the contract, which made us legally unrelated to them. My mom looked pretty sorry and did apologize for it a few times before signing the contract, but it was too late to make amends. Many of our relatives and acquaintances who had bashed us previously have been apologizing, but I have decided to stay away from drama and have gone off social media for a while, so this Reddit post is the first thing I will be posting in a long time. Edit. I saw the comments on this update asking about how our personal lives have been. Thank you for the concern. So for a month after the apology, Joe and I were pretty occupied at first responding to calls and such, but then as mentioned, took a break from social media to focus on our lives, which has been good. I recently found out that I am pregnant with our first child, and the joy of bringing new life has kept us both the good kind of busy. Megan also faced some issues after the apology, and more so because she was the one who verbally took a stand against them, but she dealt with it pretty well. Also, she and Joe's groomsmen, whom she liked, have been dating for 2 months now and are going steady. I informed her recently about my pregnancy, and she has been going crazy, the good kind, over the prospect of becoming an aunt. If things go well, she and her boyfriend will be getting engaged soon. My parents have been away as the contract mentioned, and I haven't cared enough to know their whereabouts. I did visit my grandma the previous week, and she mentioned something about mom going to therapy after whatever happened, but I brushed it off and she got the hint. I do understand why some people in the comments have previously mentioned that cutting off contact with my parents might have been too harsh, but after all I had gone through during my childhood and how my and Megan's relationship was put on the line just because of my parents, it wasn't possible for me to forgive and accept them after a half-hearted apology.